Hey guys, I wanted to show you my 44 Magnum Mosin Na-gaunt. Hold it, hang on before you start accusing me of heresy. It was ruined when I got it. The story of how I acquired this poor thing is kind of weird. Basically, a crackhead lent it to someone I know and asked them to sight it in for him. As soon as the person got it and saw the rifle, they knew it was bad news. The inside of the barrel looked like the underside of a Ford truck, not to mention the ridiculous Chinese red dot mounted to what I think is the world's worst scope mount. Yes, look at it. You level the scope with two Allen screws. And the underside? Yes, that's epoxy. The scope didn't even have a manufacturer or model number. The only writing it had on it was China, in quotes. So my friend takes the rifle, I guess for no other reason than to get it out of the hands of this dude, and does a post-mortem on it and decides it isn't salvageable. So he says, yeah, I'll work on it and I'll let you know. A little over 10 years go by and my friend hasn't heard from the guy since the day he got the rifle. He isn't even totally convinced that this guy is still alive. I'm over one day eye-fucking his collection and see this. He tells me everything I just told you. Instantly my autism kicks in and I get a bout of verbal diarrhea and go on a rant about how cool a 44 mag Mosin would be and what I would do to accomplish that. He said, take it. I get it home into the gun room and start the disassembly. My already low expectations of the smith who had bubbed this rifle were lowered even further when I saw this. This is the front screw that holds the stock to the action. Yes, that is thread tape. Yes, it's under the head of the screw. The rifle had started life in the Tula plant in 1944. The hole for that screw wasn't tapped all the way into the action, but with the original stock it didn't matter. The ATI stock had a slightly deeper hole which made the screw bottom out before it was tight against the stock. And get a load of this. Anyone who has ever worked in injection molding, just imagine the amount of work that went into adding that extra eye on the die whenever these things were cast. But yeah, I just ran one of my taps all the way through whenever the barrel was off. Fun fact for you guys, Mosins are built in imperial units, not metric. I think that was part of the reason why so many of these abominations exist. It's easier for the home gamer since all of the threads and holes aren't in metric. But after all of that, I'd started making my own action wrench. A big piece of steel I liberated from the scrap bin at work, chucked in my lathe did nicely. Drilled it out to just slightly bigger than the receiver, then rather painstakingly filed the rest of it in for that lug on the bottom. I still don't have my own mill yet, but will at some point. So this is basically the setup I used to get the barrel off. And my script here, right here, says, not X how? I don't remember what I was trying to say there. When the Russians put these barrels on, they weren't thinking anyone would ever take them off, not to mention 65 years of poor maintenance and corrosive ammo. See that shitty particle board tabletop? I literally tore the vise off my bench when trying to get the barrel off. I ended up clamping the vise in my press and using about 4 foot of cheater bar to get the barrel off. The threads were shitty with rust. Fortunately, only on the barrel. The internal threads on the receiver were in pretty good shape. Here's a look at a Mosin you almost never get to see. It's like peeping through some chick's window when she's changing. It's fucking exhilarating. This shouldn't be, yet it is. The rest of the barrel isn't that impressive of a story. If you know anything about lathe work and chambering barrels, it was exactly like that. I measured the barrel to as close as I could, and then I turned it to as close as I could. The chamber reamer was from PTG and was like $150, and the 44 barrel blank was a 1 20 inch twist from Green Mountain. I think it was like 20 inches, but I don't remember. For some reason, this is the only picture I took of the barrel before it was installed. You can see my half-assed attempt to file in the extractor cut. I ended up having to persuade the extractor a bit before the bolt would close. Here's where shit gets interesting, though. Check out the material I removed from the magazine. The original Mosin magazine had a track pressed into the mag to keep the 7.62 aligned right. It won't work for 44 mag. So I just eliminated that track, and you can see here the gun was re-arsenaled at some point. Another problem with the 44 mag is that the cartridge isn't as wide as 7.62 by 54, so I welded a doubled over piece of banding on the inside of the magazine. Because of the placements of the welds, I had to file out a channel on the follower of the magazine. Another issue is that 44 mag is about half the length of 7.62 by 54R. If put in a normal magazine, the 44 mag will tilt until the bottom round is pointing straight up. To correct this, I took another piece of the same banding and cut it down and bent it over so it would reduce the length of the magazine. This fixed the issue and requires no permanent modifications to the gun. Unlike all the other permanent modifications that I had already made, it's held in place by the follower latch, or whatever the hell you call that. The biggest issue, though, was getting the rounds to feed where the fuck. 44 mag is about half the length of 54R, so the normal feed ramps of the receiver are just out of the question. Somehow, I got away with one of the dirtiest things I had ever done. I drilled and tapped in the interim between the barrel and the lugs and ran a machine screw into it, and then filed down one side of the screw. Here's the bolt all the way forward. And here it is in battery. You notice that screw clears the bolt whenever it's locked. And here's a live round being pushed by the bolt. Here it is making contact with the angled screw. And here it is getting pushed up high enough to enter the chamber. I'm sure using hollow points wasn't the best choice, but if it'll feed these, it'll feed anything. Next up was the bolt. 44 mag has a smaller diameter rim than 54R. Normally I would have just said fuck it and left it, but about 50% of the time the extractor wouldn't catch on the rim of the cartridge. The solution, of course, was to get the rim closer to the extractor. I turned a ring out of some random piece of metal I found underneath the lathe. Internal diameter about 10 thousandths larger than the rim of a 44 mag. External diameter about 2 thousandths larger than the walls of the bolt face. And then I snuck it into work and used the TIG welder on it. It didn't go nearly as well as I had expected it to, though. Now, I am a welder, just entirely self-taught. My fellow welders just imagine trying to weld a razor blade to a train track. That's about what it was like. And much to my surprise, when I got it home and began cleaning it up with the file, I noticed it had hardened and that the file wouldn't even touch it. The random bit of metal I got off the ground was most likely a piece of W1 tool steel. I don't have any carbide tooling for the lathe, so that was off the table. I ended up just using a few almost worn out cutting discs for my Dremel. It functions great, it just looks a bit rough. Another modification I had to make was to the ejector, interrupter, whatever the hell you call this part right here. I had to put a bead of weld on the very end of it to act as the new ejector. I don't know what to call it. You can clearly see which part I modified, though, versus the old part, because of the length of the case. Now, the more astute amongst you might realize that this rifle's missing something that some might consider pretty important. It doesn't have any sights yet. Like I said earlier, I still don't have my own mill, so it's a huge pain in the ass to cut a dovetail for sights. Eventually I'm going to work on it to, where it actually has sights and you can actually aim the thing and you can actually shoot it. But for right now, that project got put on the back burner. On the day I'm recording this, I'm about 2 days away from having 2 P90 magazines. I don't have a P90, but you guys will just have to wait and see what kind of shit I've got planned for those.